The palace of Empress floated above the clouds of Prime like a dream made of crystal and light. Its towers reached toward the stars, and its halls stretched for miles in every direction. 300 guards protected its walls. 200 servants kept its floors clean and its gardens alive. Advisors and nobles filled its chambers with whispered plans and ancient politics. And in all of this, there was one human. Commander Cole stood at the edge of the grand balcony, watching the twin suns set over the cloud sea below. He was 42 years old, with gray starting to show in his short dark hair. His face carried the lines of a man who had seen war, and his eyes held the quiet alertness of someone who never truly relaxed. He wore the simple blue uniform of a diplomatic liaison, a title that meant almost nothing in this place. They were beautiful in a way that made humans feel small. They stood 7 feet tall, with skin that shimmered like oil on water, changing colors with their moods. They had 4 arms and moved with a grace that made walking look like dancing. Their civilization was older than human writing. Their technology could reshape planets and fold space like paper. They looked at the way a professor might look at a clever dog. Still watching the shadows, human turned to find Lord approaching. The captain of the guard was impressive even by standards, his skin shifting through shades of proud gold and dismissive silver. His 4 hands rested on the hilts of 4 ceremonial blades, weapons that were also connected to his neural combat system. Old habits, said, hard to break. Your species is full of habits, said, most of them useless. The jumping at sounds, the checking of corners, the sleeping with one eye open. He made a gesture that had learned meant amusement mixed with pity. You evolved as prey animals, and it shows. Had heard this before. Many times he simply nodded. The trade delegation, he said, changing the subject. The one that arrived last week. Have your people their credentials? Skin flickered with annoyance. The merchants, they have been 7 times through 7 different systems. Their genetic signatures match. Their ship codes are authentic. Their purpose is trade. He leaned closer and his voice dropped. Human, you have been here for 8 months. In that time you have reported 47 suspicious activities. All 47 have been nothing. Perhaps your prey instincts are not as useful as you believe. Wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that 3 of the servants in the delegation moved wrong. Their bodies said merchant, but their eyes said soldier. He wanted to point out the unusual communication signals he had detected, the ones that used frequencies that considered obsolete. But he had learned that arguing with was like arguing with a wall. A very tall, very condescending wall. You're probably right, said. Nodded, satisfied, and walked away. His footsteps made no sound on the crystal floor. Returned to watching the shadows. The truth was, Cole had not been sent to Prime because he was a skilled diplomat. He had been sent because humanity needed representation in the Galactic Concord, and the real diplomats were needed on worlds that actually mattered. Prime was a ceremonial posting, a place where nothing ever happened, ruled by an empress whose role was mostly symbolic. It was, his superiors had explained, a place where he could not cause trouble. They did not know very well. In 8 months had mapped every corridor in the palace. He knew which doors led where, which passages were forgotten, which routes could get someone from the servant quarters to the royal chambers in under 3 minutes. He had studied the guard rotations until he could predict them in his sleep. He had learned the names of every servant, every noble, every guard. Not because anyone asked him to, because that was what he did. That was what humans did, the ones who had survived Earth's long and bloody history. They watched. They prepared. They planned for the worst while hoping for the best. They called it paranoia, called it staying alive. A soft chime announced an arrival behind him. Turned and immediately dropped to one knee, bowing his head. Empress stepped onto the balcony. She was younger than most of her court, only 200 years old, which made her practically a child by standards. Her skin held colors that had never seen on any other, soft blues and gentle purples that seemed to carry their own light. She wore a gown made of woven starlight, and a crown of living crystal rested on her brow. She was, quite simply, the most beautiful being had ever seen. "Rise, Commander Cole," she said. Her voice was like music, but there was warmth in it that her courtiers lacked. "You know I dislike formality when we are alone." "Stood habit, Your Majesty, hard to break." A smiled. It was a small smile, hidden quickly but real. "You use that excuse often." "It's often true." She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the dying light of the twin suns. For a moment, they simply stood together, human and Empress, watching the sky burn gold and red. "You spoke with Lord," she said. "It was not a question." "I did. He believes you are paranoid." "He's mentioned that." A turn to look at him. Her eyes were like pools of liquid silver, ancient and knowing. "And what do you believe, Commander?" Considered the question carefully. The Empress was the only person in the palace who spoke to him as an equal. She found humanity fascinating in a way her court found embarrassing. She asked questions about Earth, about human history, about the strange creatures who had crawled out of mud and reached for stars. He decided to tell her the truth. "I believe that 3 servants in the trade delegation are not servants," he said. "I believe there has been unusual communication traffic that your security systems consider unimportant because it uses old frequencies. I believe that something is wrong and I cannot prove it, and no one will listen to me because I am just a human." I studied him for a long moment. "And if you are wrong?" "Then I am wrong, and I will apologize for wasting your time." "And if you are right?" Met her silver eyes. "Then I hope I am ready." The Empress held his gaze. Something passed between them, something that had no name in any language. Then she nodded once and turned to leave. "Sleep well, Commander Cole," she said over her shoulder. "Tomorrow is the Festival of 7 Moons. The entire court will gather. It would be a shame if you missed it." Bowed as she left, then he returned to his watching. That night, as he lay in his small quarters, noticed something strange. The palace had a constant hum, a soft vibration from its massive power grid. Every building made sounds, and had learned this one like a heartbeat. At exactly midnight the hum flickered, just for 3 seconds, just enough for to notice. He sat up in the darkness, every instinct screaming. Something was coming. And no one would believe him until it was too late. The Festival of 7 Moons was the most important celebration in the calendar. Once every 50 years, all 7 moons of prime aligned in the night sky, and the palace filled with light and music and joy. Every noble family sent representatives. Every guard stood at attention. Every servant worked through the night to ensure perfection. The grand hall was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers floated overhead, held aloft by gravity fields. Fountains of liquid light danced between pillars of carved stone. 3,000 filled the hall, their iridescent skin creating a sea of shifting colors. Music played from instruments that had no human names, creating sounds that touched something deep in the soul. Stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. He had not slept. The flickering power grid haunted his thoughts. He had spent the morning checking his equipment, making sure everything was ready. His sidearm was fully loaded, a simple chemical propellant pistol that the considered primitive. His knife was sharp. His boots were tied tight. Lord had laughed when he saw his preparations. "You bring ancient weapons to a festival. Truly, humans are strange creatures." Had said nothing. He simply took his position and waited. The Empress sat on her throne at the far end of the hall, surrounded by her closest advisors. She wore a gown of woven moonlight, and her crown blazed with the light of captured stars. She looked beautiful and untouchable, a goddess among mortals. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, nodded once. She returned the gesture, so slight that no one else noticed. The ceremony began. The high priest of the 7 moons raised his 4 arms and began to chant. The crowd fell silent. The music faded. The lights dimmed slowly, preparing for the moment when the 7 moons would appear through the crystal dome overhead. Felt the hair on his neck stand up. Something was wrong. He scanned the crowd, looking for the source of his unease. The servants moved through the shadows, carrying trays of drinks and food. The guards stood at their posts, their Neuralink systems glowing softly behind their ears. The nobles swayed gently to the dying music. Then he saw them. 3 servants moving together through the crowd. They carried no trays. They walked with a purpose that had nothing to do with service, and their eyes, hidden in the shadows, were fixed on the throne. Opened his mouth to shout a warning. The lights went out. Not a flicker, not a dimming, complete and total darkness, as if someone had erased light from the universe. The crowd gasped, someone screamed. And then the killing began. Heard the first body fall, then the second, then a dozen more, the screams echoing off the crystal walls. He heard the hiss of plasma blades igniting, saw brief flashes of green light as weapons activated. But the guards were not fighting back. Their Neuralink systems were dead. Their weapons would not fire. Their communication implants fed them nothing but static. Centuries of depending on technology had left them helpless without it. They stumbled in the darkness, blind and confused, and the attackers cut them down like wheat before a scythe. Did not stumble, did not freeze. He drew his pistol and moved. The darkness meant nothing to him. He had trained in darkness. He had fought in darkness. He had learned to use his ears and his instincts when his eyes failed. He heard the footsteps of an attacker approaching and fired twice. The muzzle flash lit up a face that was changing, shifting from to something else. Something with gray skin and red eyes and teeth like needles. Shapeshifters, assassins. The creature fell and kept moving. He pushed through the panicked crowd, heading for the throne. Around him, the massacre continued. They had planned this perfectly. The EMP had killed everything they depended on, and now they moved through the darkness with thermal vision, hunting prey that could not fight back. But they had not planned for. He killed 3 more before reaching the edge of the noble section. His pistol barked in the darkness, each shot finding its target. He moved between bodies, living and dead, never stopping, never hesitating. A plasma blade swung at his head. He ducked, feeling the heat singe his hair, and drove his knife into the attacker's throat. The gurgled and fell, pulled his knife free and kept running. The throne room doors were ahead. 2 guards stood before them, their real forms now visible in the chaos. They turned as approached, surprised that anyone was still fighting. Shot the first one in the head. The second lunged at him with claws extended, grabbed one of its arms and used its momentum to throw it into the wall. Before it could recover, he put 2 bullets in its chest. He kicked open the doors. Inside, the royal chambers were lit by emergency crystals that cast everything in dim blue light. 3 guards lay dead on the floor, their weapons cold and useless in their hands. Lord lay among them, his golden skin faded to gray, killed by a servant he had known for 30 years. And in the center of the room stood Empress. She was frozen, her silver eyes wide with terror. Her neural implants fed her nothing but static, overloading her senses with noise. She could not see. She could not hear. She could only stand there helpless as an assassin approached with a blade raised. Did not think, he did not aim, he simply acted. The pistol kicked in his hand. This head snapped back and it crumpled to the floor. Flinched at the sound, still blind to what was happening, holstered his weapon and approached her slowly. "Your Majesty," he said softly, it's the human, you're safe." She turned toward his voice, her hands reaching out. Her fingers found his face, traced his features, confirmed what her ears had told her. "Commander Cole," she whispered, "what is happening?" "Assassins, they killed the power grid. Your guards are dead or dying. We need to move. I cannot see, I cannot hear properly. My implants. I know, took her hands and guided them to his arm. Hold on to me, trust me, I will get you out of here. She gripped his arm with a strength born of fear. Where will we go? Thought quickly. The main corridors would be full of. The noble quarters were a death trap. But the servant passages, the forgotten routes he had spent months mapping, those might still be clear. I know a way, he said, but I need you to trust me completely, not as a diplomat, as what I really am. A's grip tightened. And what are you, Commander Cole? In the darkness, surrounded by death, allowed himself a small smile. I'm a survivor, Your Majesty. It's what humans do. He led her toward a hidden door behind the throne. Behind them, the screams continued. The palace that had never known violence was drowning in it. But Cole was still standing, and he intended to stay that way. The servant passages were narrow and dark, built centuries ago for workers who were meant to be invisible. Dust covered the floors. Cobwebs hung from the ceilings. The air smelled of age and forgotten things. Too, they smelled like safety. He moved through the darkness with A's hand gripping his arm. She stumbled often, unused to walking without her enhanced senses. Each time she fell, he caught her. Each time she faltered, he steadied her. How do you know these passages? She whispered. I walked them, said. Every day for 8 months. Your guards thought I was wasting time. Your advisors thought I was lost. But I was learning. Learning what? How to keep you alive if everything else failed. They moved in silence for a while. Behind them, distant screams echoed through the walls. They were still hunting, still killing. Counted the turns, remembering his mental map. Left, right, straight for 50 meters down a narrow staircase. Why? I asked suddenly. Why what? Why would you spend months preparing for something that might never happen? Your position here is ceremonial. No one expected you to fight. No one would have blamed you for hiding. Considered the question as they walked. It was a fair question. He was not a hero. He was not special. He was just a soldier who had been put on a shelf and forgotten. On Earth, he said slowly, we have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. It is not pessimism, it is just how we survive. Your species has survived much. Ice ages, plagues, wars that killed millions, our own stupidity over and over again. Paused at a junction, listening for footsteps. Hearing none, he continued. We are not the strongest species. We are not the fastest but we are very, very stubborn. A laughed softly. It was a strange sound in the darkness, unexpected and almost beautiful. Stubborn, she repeated. That is how you describe your greatest quality. It is not pretty, it is not noble, but it works. They continued through the passages, kept track of time in his head. It had been 2 hours since the attack began. The reinforcements would arrive in 10 hours, maybe less. If they could not send a signal before then, the Empress would die, the government would fall, and whoever had planned this would win. Refused to let that happen. They emerged into a storage room filled with old furniture and forgotten decorations, guided her to a corner and helped her sit on a dusty chair. Rest for a moment, he said. We need to talk about what comes next. What does come next? Knelt beside her. In the faint light from cracks in the walls, he could see her face. The terror was still there, but it was controlled now. She was adapting. She was stronger than she knew. Somewhere in this palace is a communication node that still works, he said. They killed the main grid, but there are backup systems, old systems, things they might have missed. And if we find one, we send a signal. Your fleet is stationed 3 hours away. If they know you are alive, they will come. But they will find us. Yes, did not soften the truth. The moment we send that signal, they will know exactly where we are. They will come for us with everything they have. A was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and found his hand in the darkness. You will fight them, she said. It was not a question. I will. You cannot win. I can try. She squeezed his hand. Why? Why would you die for me? We have spoken perhaps 20 times. You owe me nothing. Your people owe my people nothing. You could hide in these passages until rescue comes and no one would blame you. Thought about her question. He thought about duty and honor and all the grand words that soldiers used to explain sacrifice. But in the end, the answer was simpler than that. Because you spoke to me like a person, he said. When everyone else saw a primitive, you saw a man. When everyone else ignored me, you asked questions. You listened. He paused. In 8 months, you were the only one who made me feel like I mattered. I said nothing, but her hand did not let go of his. They moved again, deeper into the palace. His wounds from earlier fights were starting to ache. He had a cut on his arm that would not stop bleeding and a bruise on his ribs that hurt when he breathed. He ignored them both. An hour later, they found it. It was a small room, forgotten behind a false wall in the old archives. Inside was a communication console that ran on crystal power, a technology so ancient that even the had not thought to destroy it. Activated the console, lights flickered to life. A soft hum filled the room. It works, he said. A move to his side. Her implants were still dead, but her natural hearing was returning. Can you send a signal? I can, but I need to warn you about what happens next. The will come. Within minutes. This room has no other exits. Once I activate the distress call, there is no going back. A straightened, even blind, even stripped of her power, she was still an empress. Do it. Typed in the emergency codes. The console hummed louder. A light began to flash, sending a signal out into the void. It is done, he said. For a moment there was silence. Then, distantly, they heard footsteps, many footsteps moving fast. Checked his pistol. 8 rounds left. He still had his knife. He looked around the room and found a heavy metal bar that might have once been part of a shelving unit. There is a door in the back, he said, pointing to a small hatch in the wall. It leads to a secure chamber. Get inside, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except me. I shook her head. I will not leave you to die alone. Your Majesty. Her voice was firm. If these are my last moments, you will use my name. Looked at her. The Empress who had been a goddess was now just a woman, frightened but unbroken. He had known generals with less courage. He said, please, everything I have done tonight means nothing if you die. You are the symbol of your people. You are the proof that the failed. As long as you live, they lose. The footsteps were closer now. Could hear voices, harsh and alien, speaking in the tongue. I will hold this door, he said. I will buy you every second I can, and when help arrives they will know that you survived. That is how we win. I reached out and touched his face one last time. Her fingers traced his features, memorizing them. I will not forget you, she said. Whatever happens, I will not forget. Then I am already immortal. She turned and moved toward the hatch. Did not watch her go. He was already facing the door, weapon raised, heart steady. The footsteps stopped outside. Took a deep breath. Come on then, he whispered. Let's see what a human can do. The door exploded inward, and the poured through. And Cole began to fight. The first through the door died before it knew what was happening. His pistol barked twice, and the creature fell with 2 holes in its chest. The second one came right behind and shot it in the head. Then there were too many to count. They poured through the doorway like a wave, gray-skinned monsters with red eyes and claws that could tear through metal. Fired until his pistol clicked empty, then threw it at the nearest attacker's face. The impact bought him half a second, enough time to bring up the metal bar and swing. The bar connected with a skull and the went down, did not stop moving. He could not stop. The moment he stopped, he died. He had fought in wars on 3 different worlds. He had survived ambushes, urban combat, and battles where his entire squad was killed around him. None of it had prepared him for this. But none of it had broken him either. They were fast but was faster, not because of superhuman reflexes, but because he had spent decades training his body to react before his mind could think. He ducked under claws, lunges, and answered every attack with brutal efficiency. The bar broke on the fifth, grabbed a fallen plasma blade and kept fighting. The blade was designed for hands too long and oddly balanced. Did not care. He had learned to fight with worse. He drove the blade through an attacker's throat, pulled it free, and slashed at the next one. Blood sprayed the walls, bodies piled up in the doorway, and still they came. Took his first wound when a claw raked across his ribs. The pain was blinding, but he did not scream. He twisted away, drove the blade into his attacker's eye, and kept moving. Time became meaningless. There was only the fight: strike, dodge, strike again, breathe when possible, ignore the pain, do not fall. At some point he realized he was laughing, not from joy but from something deeper, something that had no name. They looked at him with confusion in their red eyes. They had expected prey. They had expected fear. They had not expected a human. Killed his 10th as the blade finally snapped. He caught the falling body and threw it at the next attacker, using the moment of confusion to draw his knife. It was a small weapon, meant for utility rather than combat. It would have to do. His left arm was broken. He could not remember when that had happened. Blood ran from a dozen wounds, soaking his uniform dark. Every breath was agony, but he was still standing. The attack paused. They pulled back from the doorway and for a moment was alone with the dead. Then a new figure stepped through. He was taller than the others, his gray skin marked with ritual scars. His eyes burned with cold intelligence rather than animal hunger. He wore armor of black metal and carried a blade that hummed with contained energy. "You are the human," they said. His voice was calm, almost curious. Did not lower his knife. "And you are the one in charge." "I am Lord, I command this operation." Looked at the bodies around them. "You have killed 23 of my soldiers." 24. That one in the corner is still breathing, but not for long. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are dying, human. I can see it in the way you stand. Your arm is broken. You have lost too much blood. In 10 minutes, perhaps less, you will fall whether I strike you or not." Shrugged, the motion sent fire through his broken arm. "Then you should wait 10 minutes. "Why do you persist?" Took a step closer. "Your Empress is trapped behind a door you cannot protect. Your reinforcements are still hours away. You have already lost. Why do you continue to fight?" It was a fair question. Was tired. He was broken. Every instinct told him to fall, to rest, to let the darkness take him. It would be so easy. But behind him was a door, and behind that door was a woman who had called him by his name. "Because behind me is someone who matters," said, "and in front of me is you. That is all the math I need." Studied him for a long moment. "I have conquered 12 worlds. I have killed thousands. I have never met a creature like you. Stick around. There are 8 billion more where I came from." Raised his blade. "A pity. Your species might have been useful." He attacked. The commander was everything was not. Fresh, uninjured, perfectly trained. His blade moved like lightning, cutting through the air with lethal precision. Should have died in the first exchange. But did not fight fair. He threw his knife at its face. The commander deflected it easily, but the motion opened his guard for half a second. Dove forward, inside the reach of the blade, and slammed his forehead into his nose. Bone crunched. The stumbled back, surprised by the crude attack, followed, driving his good fist into his throat. They fell together, grappling on the blood-soaked floor. Was stronger but was desperate. He bit, clawed, and slammed his broken arm into the commander's wounds, ignoring his own screaming nerves. His blade had fallen. They struggled toward it, each trying to reach it first. Fingers closed around the hilt just as claws closed around his throat. Darkness crept into the edges of his vision. He could feel his windpipe collapsing. He had seconds left. With his last strength, he drove the blade upward. The point found his throat, slid through muscle and bone, and emerged from the back of his neck. His eyes went wide. His grip loosened. "Impossible," he whispered. "No," said, "just human." Collapsed, lay beneath the body, unable to move. The ceiling above him was spinning. The sounds of the palace were fading, replaced by a ringing silence. He had won, but he had nothing left. Distantly, he heard a new sound. Engines. Many engines coming fast, and then voices shouting in, calling for survivors. The rescue had arrived. Tried to call out, but his voice was gone. He tried to raise his hand, but his body would not respond. The darkness was complete now, warm and welcoming. He closed his eyes. His last thought was of a safe behind the door he had protected. He hoped she knew. He hoped she understood. He had kept his promise. The palace had gone quiet. Only the human had remained. And against all odds, against all reason, he had won. Cole died 3 times on the operating table. 3 times his heart stopped. 3 times the doctors used technology that was ancient when humanity was still living in caves to pull him back. They rebuilt his shattered arm with synthetic bone. They repaired his torn organs with cellular regeneration. They replaced the blood he had lost with fresh supplies from a dozen donors. And each time death reached for him, refused to go. "Stubborn," the lead surgeon murmured, watching the human's vital signs stabilize for the 3rd time. "Even unconscious, he is stubborn." Slept for 9 days. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was light. Soft, golden light streaming through crystal windows. He was in a room he did not recognize, surrounded by machines that hummed with quiet efficiency. And sitting beside his bed, wearing a simple gown instead of her royal finery, was Empress. "You are awake," she said softly. Tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Reached for a glass of water and helped him drink. Her hands were gentle, careful. "How long?" he managed. 9 days. The doctors said you should have died. They said no one could survive those wounds." She smiled, and there was something new in her eyes, something that had not been there before. "They do not know humans very well." Looked down at his body. Bandages covered most of his chest. His left arm was encased in a healing sleeve. But he was alive. Against all odds, he was alive. Though he asked. "Destroyed. When my fleet arrived, they found the palace littered with their bodies. The survivors fled, but we have tracked them. They will face justice." Paused. "You killed 31 of them, including their commander, alone." "I had motivation." Laughed. It was a sound he had never heard from her before, free and unguarded. "You had stubbornness. It seems to be a powerful weapon." Over the following weeks, learned what had happened while he lay unconscious. The Galactic Concord had launched a full investigation. The plot was exposed, revealing a plan that would have thrown 12 systems into chaos. Ambassadors from 100 worlds demanded answers. Treaties were rewritten. Alliances shifted. And everywhere, the story of the human spread. The primitive, the overlooked, the one who had watched the shadows when no one else would. He had stood alone against an army, armed with nothing but ancient weapons and the refusal to fall. He had saved an empress when her own guards could not. For the first time in galactic history, other species looked at humanity with something other than condescension. They looked with respect. 3 weeks after woke, Empress addressed the Galactic Concord in person. She stood before representatives of 200 species, her crown blazing with light, her voice carrying to every corner of the great chamber. "We believed ourselves superior," she said. "We looked at younger species and saw only their limitations. We forgot that evolution is not a ladder but a tree, with many branches, each adapted to different challenges. She paused, letting her words sink in. When the lights went out, our technology failed us. Our guards, trained for centuries, were helpless. Our defenses, built over, crumbled in moments. And in that darkness, only one being remained standing. A human. The chamber was silent. A continued. He did not fight because of superior strength or advanced weapons. He fought because of something we had forgotten how to value: adaptability, persistence, the simple, stubborn refusal to surrender. She raised her head. Humanity calls this being human. I call it the quality that may yet save us all. 2 days later, Cole was summoned to the throne room. He walked slowly, still healing from his wounds. The courtiers who once ignored him now bowed as he passed. The guards who once mocked his primitive weapons now saluted with genuine respect. Awaited on her throne, surrounded by her advisors. But when entered, she stood and descended the steps to meet him at the floor. "Commander Cole," she said, her voice formal but warm, "you have served this court with honor beyond measure. You have saved my life, my throne, and my people. The conquered asks how we should reward you." Thought about the question. He could ask for riches, for power, for a ship to take him anywhere in the galaxy. He could ask for anything, and it would be given. But there was only one thing he wanted. "I would like to stay," he said, "if you will have me." A's eyes widened. "Stay." This palace needs someone who watches the shadows, someone who prepares for the worst, someone who will stand when others fall. He met her eyes. "I would like to be that someone." A was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. "Shield of the Empress," she said. "Guardian of the quiet hours, that is what we will call you. A title created for you alone, to be carried by no one else in our history." Bowed his head. "I am honored." "And more than a title," she continued, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "A friend, if you will accept it. A place at my side, not as a servant or a symbol, but as someone I trust completely." Looked up at her, the goddess who had become a woman, the empress who had called him by his name. "I would like that very much," he said. 6 months later, the Palace of Prime held its first celebration since the Festival of 7 Moons. Nobles filled the grand hall, their skins shimmering with colors of joy and renewal. Music played, light danced, life continued. And at the edge of the crowd, as always, stood Cole. He wore the uniform of his new position, simple black with a single silver star. His wounds had healed, leaving scars that he did not bother to hide. His eyes still watched the shadows, still noted the exits, still measured every threat. A young noble whispered to his companion as they passed, "Why do they keep the human so close? He is not beautiful, he is not elegant, he is just a primitive soldier." A standing nearby heard the whisper. She turned to face the noble, and her eyes held the cold light of stars. "Because when the lights go out and the silence falls," she said, "you want a human at your back. They do not know how to surrender. They do not know how to quit. They simply endure no matter the cost." She looked at and he looked back at her. Something passed between them, something that had been growing since that terrible night. Understanding, respect, and perhaps something more. "That," said, "is what makes them precious beyond measure." The noble bowed and hurried away, properly chastised. A walked to his side. "You heard that," she said. "I did. Does it bother you, what they say about your species?" Shook his head. "They can say what they like, I know what we are." "And what is that?" He smiled, the same smile he had given in the darkness when death came calling. "Survivors, it is what we do. It is what we have always done. And it is what we will always do until the last star burns out and the universe goes quiet." I took his arm, a gesture that would have scandalized her court just months ago. Now no one dared to comment. "Then stay with me, Cole," she said. "Stay and teach my people how to survive." Looked out at the grand hall, at the light and the life, and the hope that had returned to a place once filled with death. "Always," he said. and in the shadows, where no one else could see, he allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years. Peace. The human who had stood alone was alone no more. And the galaxy would never forget his name.